Elves and the Shoemaker. Follow along or listen to my voice. If you find your mind wandering, just bring it back to me whenever you're ready. There once was a shoemaker who, through no fault of his own, found himself with scarcely any money. "I don't mind that we have grown so poor," he said to his good wife, "for we can manage on very little. But the truth is that I only have enough money left to buy leather for one more pair of shoes." His wife was a plump, cheerful woman who seldom let things get her down, and who loved her husband dearly. "Don't fret, my dear," she said. "Go to the market, spend what money is left on good leather, and make the shoes." The shoemaker did as she suggested. He went to the market and spent the last of his money on a piece of fine leather. Then, as he was tired from his journey, for he was no longer young, he sat down by the roadside and had a rest before returning home. On seeing his pale face and how wearily he entered his little workshop, his wife quickly bought him something to eat. "Cut out the shoes tonight, husband," she said, "but leave the stitching of them until the morning. It is time you went to bed." So the shoemaker cut out the shoes and left them on his workbench. Then he followed his wife upstairs to bed. Little did he know that as he slept, the workshop door opened silently, and in skipped 2 little elves. They hopped onto his bench and examined the leather. Then, exchanging twinkling glances, but not saying a word, they set to work, stitching and hammering busily. When the old man awoke in the morning, he resolved, as he dressed, that he would put all his skill into the making of his final pair of shoes. There was a sad smile on his careworn face as he entered his workshop, for what he was certain that it would be for the last time. What would happen next, he didn't dare to think. He was just going to pick up his tools when he saw, to his amazement, that the leather he had cut out the night before had been made into a fine pair of shoes. There they sat on the bench, just asking to be picked up. And this the shoemaker did, holding them nervously in his hands, turning them this way and that. "Bless my soul," he exclaimed, "I've never seen finer shoes." Excited now, he called his wife, and she too exclaimed over the fine stitching. "They are so nicely made," she said at last, "so delicately stitched, and yet so strong that they are sure to fetch a good price. Let's hope a customer comes in soon." As it happened, the shoemaker did not have long to wait for his first customer, one of the richest merchants in the town. "I am looking for something special," the merchant said. And when his eyes lighted the shoes, "Yes, yes, those are just what I want, and I am willing to give more than the usual price for them." The purchase was soon made, and the delighted shoemaker found that he now had enough money to buy leather for 2 pairs of shoes. Once again he hurried off to the market, and when he returned with 2 fine pieces of leather, one black and the other blue, he set to work at once to cut out the shoes. "Leave it all there," advised his wife, after he had spent some time in his workshop. "There will be time enough in the morning to do the stitching, if it is necessary." The shoemaker slept soundly, as usual, but in the morning he confessed to his wife that he could not help feeling excited. "It's just that I do not know what to expect," he explained, as he prepared to go downstairs. "But surely it would be too much to hope that my work has already been done for me again." No sooner did the shoemaker enter his workshop than he knew, for there on the bench were 2 pairs of exquisitely made shoes. "There is no doubt," he exclaimed, turning to his wife as she followed him into the room, "that this is the work of a craftsman. I just could not do such fine stitching." That day the shoes were sold for a very large sum, and the shoemaker rushed straight off to the market. He bought enough leather for 4 more pairs of boots and shoes before returning home. "What must I do, wife?" he asked. "Shall I cut out the leather and leave it as usual on the bench? Or shall I try to make at least 1 pair of shoes before the light fails?" "Leave it all where it is," said his wife. "Come and have a bite of supper, then we'll go to bed." That night the little elves once more crept into the shoemaker's workshop and set to work, hammering and stitching. They said nothing to each other as they worked, but they whistled softly, and one would occasionally stop his labours to dance a jig in the moonlight. The shoes finished, they cleared up the workshop and left it neat and tidy. The next morning the shoemaker's delight at finding the shoes and boots all superbly made waiting for him on the bench was such that he almost wept for joy. Long before the morning was over, he had sold all 4 pairs, and each for such a vast sum that he could hardly credit his good fortune. "With all this money," he told his wife, "I will be able to buy in a large store of leather. And with the help of your invisible shoemakers," laughed his wife, "you will be able to save for our old age." Well, the shoemaker did buy in a store of fine leather, and each Each night he left 2 or 3 cut pieces on the bench. Every morning he would find 2 or 3 pairs of finely made shoes. After a month or so, word of the shoemaker's exquisite shoes spread all round the county. High-born ladies and rich, overfed lords crowded into his humble workshop, begging for the favour of having a pair of shoes or boots made especially for them. The shoemaker treated all his customers exactly alike, although it must be admitted his price to the widows and the shopkeepers he had known all his life was still very low. Sometimes, in the quiet of the evening, when the shoemaker had pulled down the shutters, he would settle down by the fire and ask his wife to sit with him. "It would be nice, husband," his wife said, on one such evening, "if we could do something for our unknown helpers." "It would be nice," repeated her husband, and thoughtfully nodding his head. "Here we are with no more fears for the future, thanks to them." He broke off and then added, "whoever they may be." "Christmas is coming in a week or so," said his wife, "and Christmas is a time of giving, so why don't we give presents to those who have helped us on our good fortune?" "Why not indeed?" exclaimed her husband. Then he added, "But what shall we give them? We do not know who they are." "Ah," went on his wife, her eyes shining with excitement, "but there is nothing to stop us finding out, and I have an idea. This very night we will hide in the workshop and keep watch." The shoemaker hesitated, but when he saw how anxious his wife was to carry out her plan, he finally agreed. And so, that night, the couple crept down to the workshop a few minutes before midnight, and they hid behind a tall cupboard. They didn't have to wait long, for just as the clock began striking 12, in came the 2 nimble little elves. They seated themselves on the shoemaker's bench, took hold of the leather that was cut out with their tiny fingers, began to hammer and stitch. They worked so swiftly and with such skill that the shoemaker had to cover his mouth with his hand to prevent himself calling out in admiration. But he managed to remain silent, and the 2 elves worked on undisturbed. They did not stop for an instant until the shoes were finished. Then, without a word to each other, they placed the shoes neatly on the bench and hopped away. "Did you see that?" exclaimed the shoemaker's wife, coming out from behind the cupboard. "Did you see that?" "I did, of course I did," said her husband. "And sorry I was for those 2 little elves. They were so poorly dressed, and in this bitter winter weather too. That's what we can give them to show our gratitude," cried his wife. "I shall make them lovely warm vests and jerseys and socks for Christmas, and you can make them some tiny shoes." That night, the good-hearted couple did find it difficult to sleep, for they were so busy planning their gifts. And in the morning, the shoemaker's wife brought out her big bag of coloured wools and her knitting needles. Her husband, meanwhile, began cutting out 2 tiny pairs of shoes, and he used the finest and gayest leather he could find for his work. How happy they were that night, and all other nights before Christmas, for now at last they could show how grateful they were to the 2 little elves. The wife made vests of the softest pink and bright jerseys, one striped in the colours of blue and white, and the other in red and white. Long stripy stockings came next, and she knitted them the best that she could. Finally, she made 2 jaunty jackets and 2 knitted caps and 2 pairs of tiny mittens. "There is nothing so warm as mittens for the winter," she said confidently, when her husband burst out laughing at the sight of them. But then she had her own back when he showed her the 2 tiny pairs of leather trousers which he had cut and stitched with such patient care. "They only look big enough to fit a doll," she laughed. "But never mind. We've made these 2 kind-hearted little men gifts they will find most useful." When the presents were ready, the shoemaker and his wife waited until just before midnight. Then, once again, they crept down to the workshop. But tonight, instead of leaving out the leather, the shoemaker spread out the gifts, covering the bench with them. Then he joined his wife behind the tool cupboard and waited, for they were anxious to see what the little men would do. At the first stroke of midnight, in came the 2 elves. It was clear they were all ready to start work, but then they saw the vests and the jerseys and the woolen stockings. They just stared and stared at them as if they did not know what to do. Then, all of a sudden, one little elf pulled on the stockings, while his companion pushed his head through the neck of a jersey. In the next moment, they broke into high-pitched giggles, and half-dressed they began hopping delightedly all over the bench. The shoemaker squeezed his wife's hand, and as the elves began to dress themselves properly, stroking each article of clothing and admiring it before finally putting it on, when they were fully dressed, they clasped hands and began to sing, "Now that we are so smart and fine, our cobbling work we must resign." Then they began skipping and dancing over the chairs and the table, until at last they skipped happily right out of the door. "What did they mean, husband?" asked his wife, as the couple came out of their hiding place. "It means that our 2 little friends won't be back," said the shoemaker. "We have seen the last of them, but their delight in our presence is something I will never forget." The shoemaker, of course, elves never did return, but by now he was so famous that he could sell shoes without any trouble, and the shoes he made himself were, strange to say, just as good as the ones made by his elven cobblers. So the couple prospered and lived very happily to the end of their days. I hope you enjoyed that story. If you did, please subscribe and follow along for the next one.